The bell rang, sharp, sudden, and everything stopped. Chairs scraped once, then not at all. Exercise books lay flat. Every head faced forward. You could almost hear your own breathing as the room settled into silence. Somewhere down the corridor, shoes echoed on polished floors, growing louder with every step. You didn't need to look up to know an adult was approaching. You just felt it. Back then, classrooms weren't places you relaxed into. They were places you stayed alert. One wrong glance, one whispered word, one moment of fidgeting, and suddenly you were noticed. Not praised, just noticed. Today, classrooms hum with conversation, questions, movement. Children are encouraged to speak, to explain, to be heard. So it's hard not to ask, looking back now, how did that silence feel so normal? And why do so many people still remember it so clearly, all these years later? To understand why schools felt so strict in the 1970s, you have to step into the thinking of the time. Many teachers had grown up during or just after the war years in a Britain where order wasn't optional, it was survival. Routines mattered, rules mattered. Doing as you were told was seen as a virtue, not something to question. Schools weren't just places to learn facts, they were places to shape future adults who could follow instructions, hold their nerve, and get on with it. The idea was simple: structure built strength. Quiet classrooms meant focus. Firm rules meant respect. If you learned early not to answer back, not to stand out, not to make a fuss, you'd be better prepared for the working world waiting outside the school gates. Feelings, by contrast, were rarely part of the conversation. Worry, embarrassment, or confusion were often brushed aside as things children would grow out of, individual personalities. We're expected to fit neatly into the system, not the other way around. From today's perspective, it can feel cold, but at the time, many adults genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. They weren't trying to harm, they were trying to prepare. And that's what makes looking back so unsettling, because when an entire system agrees that silence equals success, no one stops to ask what it costs the children learning to keep it. There were rules everywhere in 1970s schools, written ones, unwritten ones, and the kind you only learned by watching what happened to someone else. Uniforms were worn a certain way, and everyone knew it. Shoes polished, shirts tucked in just right, hair checked. Not because it affected learning, but because appearance was seen as a sign of discipline. If you looked orderly, you were orderly, or so the thinking went. Inside the classroom, silence carried its own weight. Not the calm, comfortable quiet we talk about today, but a tense stillness. You sat straight. You kept your eyes forward. You didn't speak unless spoken to. Even asking a question felt risky. You had to weigh it up. Is this worth being noticed? And being noticed was rarely a good thing. Public warnings were common, a name spoken sharply across the room, a pause that felt far longer than it really was. Everyone else pretending not to look while secretly watching out of the corner of their eye. Most children never told their parents about moments like that, not because they were told not to, but because it felt pointless. This was just how school worked. Then there were the rituals, standing outside the classroom door, waiting in silence, hands behind backs in corridors, being asked to explain yourself carefully, knowing that the wrong tone, even a polite one, could be taken the wrong way. Answering back didn't have to be rude to be remembered, and that's something many people still recall clearly, how powerless it felt to explain yourself. You could be right, but it didn't matter. Understanding wasn't the goal, compliance was. Mistakes weren't private learning moments, they were public lessons. The message was simple: don't stand out, don't draw attention, don't give anyone a reason to single you out. Better to blend in, better to stay quiet. What's striking looking back now is how quickly children adapted. You learned the rhythms, when to speak, when not to, how to disappear into your chair, how to read a room before opening your mouth. Silence mattered more than curiosity. Order mattered more than explanation. And at the time, it didn't feel unusual. Everyone you knew experienced it. Every classroom sounded the same. Every corridor felt the same. It was only years later, often decades later, that people began to realize just how much energy it took to be a child in a place where the safest option was often to say nothing at all. For many people, the school days themselves faded long ago, but the feelings never quite did. Even now, some adults notice a tightening in the chest when they're called into a formal meeting, or a familiar hesitation before speaking up in a room full of people. Not because they lack ideas, but because somewhere, deep down, being noticed still feels uncomfortable. As children, many learned to adapt in quiet ways. Some became very good at staying under the radar. Others learned to follow rules to the letter, just in case. Being agreeable felt safer than being curious. Invisible felt safer than being different. At the time, these were survival skills. They helped children get through the day without drawing attention to themselves. But looking back, it's worth asking what those lessons really taught. Did staying silent build confidence, or did it teach people to doubt their own voice? Did learning not to question authority create resilience, or simply caution? There's no single answer. For some, those years built structure and discipline. For others, they planted seeds of self-doubt that took years to unpick. What matters now is the recognition, the understanding that those reactions didn't come from nowhere. They were learned slowly, quietly, in classrooms where being seen was something to avoid. And for many, watching today, simply naming that truth can feel like a small release. Step into a classroom today, and the contrast is striking. There's movement, conversation, questions are welcomed, not weighed up in silence. Children are encouraged to explain how they feel, not hide it. Of course, every era has its challenges. No system is perfect. But it's hard not to wonder whether something important shifted along the way, from control to understanding, from order to connection. Looking back, those 1970s classrooms feel like another world. And yet, the memories remain vivid, carried quietly for decades. If you were there, you'll remember it in your own way. And if you weren't, it's a reminder of just how much childhood and British life itself has changed.